My mother-in-law set the table for 7 people. There were 8 of us walking through her front door that night. So she picked up my daughter's plate, my 8-year-old's plate, the one with the little chipped flour on the rim, and she carried it into the laundry room and set it on top of the dryer. Like a casserole dish nobody needed anymore. Like a thing you store. She thought an 8-year-old was the easiest person in that house to erase. By the time dessert should have been served, she was the one standing alone at her own table, in a room gone completely silent, staring down at 2 pieces of paper that were about to end 3 years of quiet favoritism for good. And the wildest part? It wasn't even my husband who broke her that night. It was me. It was the numbers. Stick around because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly why blood was the worst word my mother-in-law ever chose to fight me with. Welcome back to Silent Revenge, the channel where we don't yell, we don't slam doors, we just quietly, patiently let the truth do the damage. If you're new here, hit subscribe because trust me, you don't want to miss how 3 years of favoritism finally got balanced in one night. I'm your storyteller tonight, and this is the story of the night my mother-in-law learned that some debts don't stay hidden forever. My name is Claire. I'm 36. I run a small accounting practice out of a converted spare bedroom in Maple Ridge, a quiet little town where the biggest excitement most weeks is the Saturday farmers market. I audit small businesses for a living. I find the missing dollar, the receipt nobody wanted found. It's a strange skill to have when your own family is quietly falling apart at the Sunday dinner table. But it turns out it's the skill you need most. I live with my husband Dan to everyone who loves him, in a narrow 2-story house on Larkspur Lane, the kind of house where the kitchen never quite gets warm no matter how high you crank the thermostat. Our daughter Lily's crayon drawings cover the refrigerator door edge to edge. You have to peel one back just to get the milk out. That's not an exaggeration, that's just Tuesday in our house. Dan runs the finishing floor at a custom furniture workshop in Fairview, about 20 minutes from us. He's got sawdust permanently ground into the cuffs of every shirt he owns, and hands so gentle you'd never guess he can sand a tabletop smoother than glass. I married him 3 years ago, when Lily was 5 and still called every man at the hardware store sir because Dan taught her manners before he taught her anything else. Dan has 2 kids from his first marriage, Noah 13 and Ava 11. All elbows and opinions the way middle schoolers are supposed to be. They stay with us every other weekend and half the summer, and honestly I love the chaos. I love a house that's loud and slightly too small for the number of backpacks piled by the door. I love it most when nobody in it is keeping score. Here's the thing nobody in this family had bothered to add up. I was the one keeping it running. I scheduled the dentist appointments and remembered whose car needed an oil change. I remembered which cousin couldn't eat gluten and which aunt wasn't speaking to which uncle that particular month. And whenever Dan's parents needed something, anything, the request went to Dan, but the money came from me. Quietly. The way I handle most things. I'm not telling you this to sound like a martyr. I'm a numbers person. Tracking what goes out and what comes back is just how my brain settles at the end of the day. Every family has one person who keeps the porch light on for everyone else. In ours, that was me, and nobody had ever done the math on what that meant. I used to think that was fine. I believed the best kind of giving left no fingerprints behind. I was wrong. It took an 8-year-old standing frozen in a doorway to teach me how wrong. You don't keep peace in a family by quietly paying for it every single month. All you're really doing is teaching everyone else that the peace is free, and that they never have to lift a finger to keep it. Every other Sunday we made the drive out to Pinehaven, the little farm town where Dan grew up, to have dinner with his parents. His mom, Vivian, keeps a spotless house and an even colder ledger of who counts as real family and who doesn't. From the very first dinner I ever sat through in that dining room, Vivian had a specific way of saying Lily's name. She'd put just a little bit of space around it, like it didn't quite belong in her mouth. "And how's Claire's girl doing?" she'd ask. Never our Lily. Never the baby. Always pointedly Claire's girl. Meanwhile, Noah and Ava got the good chairs and the second helpings. They got told constantly that they had the Bennett jaw, the Bennett stubborn streak, the Bennett everything. Lily got told to be careful on the stairs. I remember the Christmas before all this happened, watching Vivian hand out gifts. Noah and Ava each had a stack of presents piled up like little skyscrapers. Lily got one small box, the size and weight you'd give a neighbor you barely knew. I said something. I could not say something. Vivian just smiled that thin, practiced smile of hers and said, "Children shouldn't be spoiled, Claire." My father-in-law, Walter, stared very hard into his coffee mug and said absolutely nothing. There's a refrigerator in that Pinehaven house too, bare metal, not a single magnet on it besides a calendar from the church. Noah's school photo lives there. Ava's ribbon from the regional science fair hangs there. Not one of Lily's drawings. She'd bring a fresh one every single visit and press it into Vivian's hands right at the door, hopeful every single time. I'd find them later in the recycling bin, smoothed flat, like Vivian couldn't quite bring herself to throw them straight in the trash, but couldn't quite bring herself to keep them either. Dan once told me his mom came from people who measured worth in acres and last names. 5 generations had farmed the same stretch of Pinehaven land before the bank took it during a bad decade. To Vivian, blood wasn't sentiment. Blood was the one deed that could never be foreclosed on. Honestly, I understood her. That was the trouble. I understood her well enough that I couldn't quite bring myself to hate her for it. So I let it slide, year after year, telling myself a little kid couldn't feel a temperature she'd never been given a name for. Lily felt it. She just didn't have the words for it yet. She kept circling a question for almost a year before she finally worked up the nerve to ask it out loud. That question could wait, I told myself. Walter's heart could not. Not long after Dan and I got married, Walter's cardiologist put him on a fistful of daily medications, and the co-pays alone ran close to $500 a month. The next winter, the roof out in Pinehaven caved in during a bad ice storm. $6,000 to replace, money they simply didn't have sitting around. Walter's pension covers the basics. Not much else. The help started the way most quiet family rescues start, with one transfer I told myself was temporary. I covered the medication, then the groceries when the medication ate the grocery budget, then the roof, broken into small installments so it wouldn't show up as one scary lump sum. Dan knew. Vivian assumed it all came from him, from his shop wages, from her good son's generous heart. I never corrected her. Correcting her meant a conversation, and in that family, conversations always came with a bill somebody else made me pay. So I quietly set up the automatic payments and logged every single one of them because logging things is what my hands do when my chest gets tight. I want to be completely clear about something. I never kept those records planning to use them as a weapon. I kept them the same way I keep every ledger for every client, because numbers are the one thing in that family that never lied to me and never changed their story depending on who was sitting in the room. Column of figures doesn't care whose jaw you have. It just adds up. Month after month, it added up, and the total quietly swelled into this heavy, invisible thing I mostly avoided looking at directly. I could have told you the figure down to the dollar at any moment. I just never said it out loud. There's a certain kind of giving that curdles the longer you keep it secret. It stops being generosity. It slowly turns into evidence. I didn't understand that yet. I was about to learn it the hard way at a birthday party that was supposed to be a celebration. Don't mistake my silence for weakness, though. I'd drawn the line before, more than once, and watched the tide wash it away. The first time, I sat Vivian down at her own kitchen table and told her plainly that Lily was my daughter, her grandchild, and the cold shoulder treatment needed to stop. Vivian folded her hands and said she treated every child the same. Then she asked if I'd remembered the pharmacy receipts for Walter's prescriptions. The second time, I told Dan I was done bankrolling a house where my daughter always ate last. I meant it. I had my banking app open, thumb over the recurring transfer, ready to shut it off for good. That was the week Walter landed in the emergency room with chest pains. You can't cut off a man's heart medication to win an argument with his wife. So I closed the app. Dan asked me quietly to give his mother more time. He always asked for more time. He's a peacemaker, my husband, and peacemakers are wonderful, right up until the peace they're keeping turns out to be built on the back of your child. I gave him the time. I told myself Vivian was old, that the favoritism would die out with her generation, that patience would outlast it. I was wrong about the timeline. Hate doesn't get tired. Just waits for an audience. But I kept one sentence for myself through those 3 years, something I'd whisper in the car on the ride home while Lily slept in her booster seat. Blood doesn't make a family. Showing up does. I said it like a prayer I hadn't fully talked myself into believing yet. I had been showing up. 3 straight years in dollars and casseroles and silence. That silence was about to get loud. If you've ever quietly held a family together while nobody bothered to notice, drop a comment right now and tell me I see it. 'Cause trust me, this story is about to be for you. There was one more thing Vivian had no idea about, something Dan and I had been quietly building for almost a year. The spring before, Dan sat down on the edge of Lily's bed while she slept and just watched her a long while. Then he found me in the kitchen and said he wanted to make it real. Not stepdad. Dad. On paper in court, the kind of title nobody can argue away at a dinner table. We hired a family attorney in the county seat, a sharp woman named Patricia Odom. 'Cause Dan and I had been married over a year, and Lily had lived under our roof since she was 5, the process moved forward without a contested hearing. Lily's biological father had signed away his rights long before I met Dan. There was no one left to fight us. 6 weeks before that birthday dinner, we drove to the courthouse in our good clothes. A judge asked Dan if he understood that adoption made Lily his legal child in every sense. His heir, his responsibility forever, exactly the same as Noah and Ava. Dan said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Lily got to bang the little gavel. Clerk laughed. We still have the photo, Lily mid-swing, mouth wide open, Dan's hand steadying her wrist. Her legal name is Lily Bennett now. Not Claire's girl. Bennett. Same as the jaw, same as the stubbornness, same as everything. We hadn't told the family yet. We were saving it for the moment it would land hardest and kindest at once. Dan's birthday felt right. I pictured Vivian's face finally softening, the paperwork doing what 3 years of casseroles never could. I folded the decree into a manila envelope and tucked it in my bag before we left that morning. I told myself it was just for the announcement. Some part of me already knew better. Vivian announced she wanted to host Dan's birthday dinner herself this year, which was new. Usually I hosted and she critiqued from her recliner. This time she wanted it in Pinehaven on her table by her rules, with Dan's sister Renee handling the details. Renee is 41, recently divorced, and orbits her mother the way a moon orbits a planet it's forgotten it once had its own light. She'd moved back to Pinehaven after her split and appointed herself keeper of the family's small treasures, the albums, the good china, the endless unspoken question of who sits where. I offered to cook the way I always did. Renee said, in that bright voice that's really a closed door, that they wanted to keep it family this year. Let family handle the family things, she said. I let it go. I always let it go. But I ordered the cake anyway because Lily had asked for white frosting and fresh strawberries. I wrote out every name for the baker to pipe across the top. Dan, Claire, Lily, Noah, Ava, Vivian, Walter, Renee. The names in careful cursive icing. I remember thinking 8 was a good number. A full number. The number of a family that had grown instead of shrunk. On the phone, Renee asked if we'd meet a kids' table, then answered herself before I opened my mouth. Probably not. The kids can probably just sort themselves out. I should have heard the trap in that sentence. I didn't. Not yet. We drove out on a gray Saturday. Cake Box Road belted into the middle seat like a third child. Lily wore the green dress she'd picked herself and held a rolled-up drawing on her lap the whole ride, guarding it like treasure. A surprise for Daddy, she kept saying. No peeking. Noah and Ava rode with us too, fresh from their mom's place, bickering happily about a video game the easy way kids do when they feel safe. Dan hummed along to the radio. I watched the fields roll by and felt, for once, almost hopeful. Today we'd finally tell them. Today the paperwork would speak for itself. Vivian met us at the door with a warm hug for Dan, a curt nod for Noah and Ava, and a flat, distracted "there she is" for Lily that never once reached her eyes. The house smelled like pot roast and lemon polish. The dining room table had been set with the good china, the cloth napkins, the heavy old family silver that only ever came out for what Vivian privately called blood occasions. I set the cake down on the sideboard and did the thing I automatically do in any new room. I counted. 7 chairs. 7 plates. 7 cloth napkins folded into neat little tents. I counted again because I'm a numbers person and the first count is never the one I trust. 7. Renee came through carrying a serving pitcher and caught me staring. "We're a little tight on space this year," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes, straightening water glasses that didn't need straightening. Noah had already flopped into a chair. Ava claimed the seat by the window, which left, by my simple math, exactly enough chairs for everyone in that room, except one. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, her drawing clutched in both hands, doing the same cold math I was doing and landing on the same answer. She didn't say a word. She just stepped a little closer into my side. "Something's already off, isn't it? Comment 7 chairs below if you already know where this is going, and stay with me because it gets a lot worse before it gets better." Before dinner, our old neighbors from down the road, the Cartwrights, stopped by to drop off a birthday card for Dan. Vivian lit up. She put a hand proudly on Noah's shoulder and one on Ava's, presenting them like prize exhibits. "These are the grandchildren," she announced. "Noah's going to play football in high school. Can you believe the size of him?" Cartwrights made the right noises. Lily stood a step away, holding her drawing, smiling hopefully, waiting to be introduced too. She wasn't. Vivian's hand never moved off Noah's shoulder. Cartwrights left without ever learning Lily's name, because in that room that night, Lily apparently didn't have a name worth saying. That's when Lily tugged my sleeve and finally asked the question she'd been circling for almost a year, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "Mommy, am I a grandkid too?" I dropped to my knees right there on Vivian's floor. I told her yes. I told her she was somebody's whole world, and plenty of people's grandkid, and that anyone who couldn't see that was the one missing out. She nodded the way kids do when they want to believe you and can't quite manage it. Behind me, Vivian and Renee were talking in the kitchen, not bothering to lower their voices. Renee murmured something about the seating, and Vivian said the sentence she'd repeat twice more before the night was over, the sentence that became the spine of everything that happened next. "This table is for blood." Lily heard it. I watched it land on her, watched her file it away next to the bare refrigerator, the recycled drawings, the one small Christmas box. She didn't cry. She just went very still, the way I go still when something in me finally shuts a door. And I understood for the first time exactly whose daughter she was. Dan missed all of it. That's the cruelty of moments like this. They happen in corners in the half-second when the good man is out on the porch admiring a birthday card. He was outside with his dad, talking gutters and football, being celebrated the way he liked best, quietly. He didn't see his mother's hand stay glued to Noah's shoulder. He didn't hear the sentence. If I'd stormed onto that porch and told him, there would have been a scene and Lily would have learned her belonging was something adults had to fight over in front of company. I didn't want that for her. So I made a calculation, the kind I make all day with other people's money, weighing the cost of waiting against the cost of erupting. I chose to watch a little longer. I kept Lily close. I kept my bag closer. Inside it, flat against the lining, sat the manila envelope, and beside it, a second folder I'd printed at midnight, telling myself I wasn't really planning to bring it. 3 years of transfers. Dated. Totaled. Sorted by category: medication, roof, groceries. You don't casually pack your financial records for a birthday party. Not unless some part of you already suspects it's about to become an audit. I stood in Vivian's dining room, my daughter's hand in mine, a ledger sitting patiently in my bag, and waited to see how far she was going to go. I didn't have to wait long. Dinner was called. As everyone shuffled toward the dining room, the routine Vivian and Renee had clearly rehearsed clicked into motion. Renee's hand landed on Lily's back, steering her toward the den, toward a television, a folding tray, and the cheerful exile of a made-up treat. "Come on, sweetie, you get the special spot," Renee said. Lily looked back at me, confused, dragging her feet. I was already moving, but Dan had ducked into the kitchen to help carry out the cake, hands full, back turned, completely unaware his sister was steering his daughter into a different room. I crossed the dining room fast. Before I could reach them, Vivian stepped smoothly between me and Lily, with the practiced ease of a woman who'd spent a lifetime managing every room she walked into. She put her hand on top of Renee's, right on Lily's shoulder, and turned my daughter toward the hallway. "The children who belong at this table will sit at it," she announced, pleasant as anything, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Lily can eat in the den. It's nicer for her, honestly. She'll be more comfortable." Comfortable. That word again. Kinda sounding cruelty there is. Table went dead quiet. Noah stopped mid-sentence. Ava looked at her grandmother, then at Lily, then down at her own plate. Walter set his fork down slowly. I felt the whole night narrow down to a single point, the way a column of figures narrows to one final total, and my voice came out flat and level. The same voice I use with a client whose numbers refuse to add up when I already know why. "I already know why she's staying at this table," I said. Vivian turned to face me fully, and her pleasant mask hardened into something she'd apparently been dying to say out loud for 3 straight years. "Claire, let the real children sit with their father tonight. It's his birthday." Her hand stayed planted on Lily's shoulder, pointed straight toward the door. "Lily can have her supper in the den. There's no shame in it. She's just not," she paused and chose the cruelest possible honesty. "She's not his. Not really. Everyone in this house knows it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise at my own table." There it was. Out loud. In front of Noah, Ava, Walter, and the rolled-up drawing forgotten under Dan's arm in the next room. Lily stood frozen beneath her grandmother's hand. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the shape of them perfectly, the way a child always understands when an adult is working hard to make them small. Renee hovered nearby, ready to finish walking Lily off. And Vivian, sensing the room start to wobble, reached for her favorite anchor. "This table is for blood. 3 times now. Once in the kitchen. Once to the neighbors. Now directly to my face with my daughter pinned beneath her hand. I want to tell you I had this next part planned. I hadn't. I just knew the way you know where the floor is even in the dark. The years of letting it slide were over. My hand slid into my bag. My fingers found the envelope, then the folder behind it. I didn't raise my voice. I've never won anything by raising my voice. I took one calm step toward the table, and Vivian, badly misreading me, decided to punctuate her point with more than words. She started moving Lily toward the door. Happened fast, the way the worst moments do. Lily planted her feet, every instinct in her small body screaming to stay close to me. Vivian, growing impatient, performing for the whole table, gave her a push. Not hard enough to bruise. Hard enough to say, unmistakably, "You are a thing I can move." A push toward the front door and the cold porch beyond it, as if my daughter were nothing more than a draft to be shut out. Lily stumbled. Her hand flew out and caught the door frame. And the drawing, the one Dan had tucked under his arm and forgotten, slipped loose and dropped face up onto the floor between them. 5 figures, holding hands, face up for everyone in the room to see. Nobody said a word. The room dropped into that specific, heavy silence of people who've just watched a line get crossed and don't yet know who's brave enough to do something about it. Ava's eyes welled up. Noah shot out of his chair so fast it scraped the floor. Walter half rose, then sat back down. And Lily, my quiet, careful, watchful girl, looked down at her drawing, then straight up at me. Not crying yet. Just waiting, the way she'd been waiting her whole short life for a grown-up to fix the things she couldn't put into words. If you're still with me, comment 8th plate right now, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is the whole reason I started this channel. Don't go anywhere. Cross that room in about 3 steps. That was Vivian's second mistake that night. The first was assuming an 8-year-old was the easiest person in that house to move. The second was assuming I'd spent 3 years keeping detailed financial records for no reason at all. I reached my daughter and put my whole body between her and that open door. Somewhere behind me, I heard the cake plate hit the counter as Dan finally turned around and walked straight into the wreck of the room he'd left 5 minutes earlier. I knelt down and picked the drawing up off the floor first, smoothing it out the way I smooth every important document I've ever handled. Then I stood, hoisted Lily onto my hip, even though she's getting too big for that now, and set her down behind me, safely out of the doorway's reach. I pressed my hand flat against her back so she could feel it, steady, through her green dress. Present. Solid. Here. And I straightened up to my full height, standing between my daughter and her own grandmother. I didn't shout. Picture the opposite of shouting. I looked Vivian dead in the eye and said it slow enough that everyone in that room caught every word. Don't you ever put your hands on my child again. Vivian blinked, genuinely startled. She wasn't used to being addressed at her own table in a voice that refused to rise or shake. People who've spent their whole lives ruling a room through temperature have no idea what to do when someone goes cold instead of hot right back at them. I'm her grandmother, she started. I cut her off, still calm. You're going to want to think very carefully about the next thing you say. Renee had backed against the sideboard. Noah had come around the table to stand near Lily and me, 13 years old, furious, not entirely sure why, only that his grandmother had shoved his little sister, and his body understood that was wrong before his brain caught up. The drawing was safe in my hand. The envelope was still in my bag. 3 years of casseroles carried into that house, 3 years of quietly covered prescriptions, 3 years of finding crumpled drawings smoothed flat in the recycling bin. All of it rose up in my chest at once and condensed into one clear total. I was done keeping the peace. Dan stood frozen in the doorway, frosting still on his thumb, reading the room the way you read a car accident, all at once and too late. Lily behind me, eyes wet. The drawing in my hand. His mother's arms still half raised. His sister pressed against the sideboard. His father staring at the tablecloth like it might offer him an exit. He's not a fast man, my husband. He's a measure twice, cut once kind of man. So he didn't come charging in. He set the cake plate down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started shaking and you'd rather nobody noticed. What happened? He said. Not loud. Flat. Cartwright's birthday card sat propped on the sideboard, cheerfully wishing him a happy birthday, while his mother stood there deciding how much of the truth she was willing to admit. Nothing happened, Vivian said quickly. I asked Lily to eat in the den, and Claire made a production out of it. Noah's voice cracked across the room before I could open my mouth. Grandma pushed her. She pushed Lily into the door. A 13-year-old will tell you the plain truth in a room full of adults who've all quietly agreed to lie. God bless him for it. Ava nodded fast, backing her brother up. Dan looked at his son, then his daughter, then realized the drawing he'd been carrying was gone. The best present he'd ever gotten, he'd said, now creased from the fall. Something settled in his face. Not rage exactly. Something quieter and more permanent. The look of a man rerunning every Sunday dinner from the last 3 years and finally arriving at a total he should have run a long time ago. He walked around the table, stood in front of Lily and said, "Tell me exactly what my mom just did." Vivian should have stopped right there. A wiser woman, or maybe just a less frightened one, would have read her son's face and pulled back. But Vivian had built her whole life on one unmovable idea, and once you've staked everything on a single idea, you defend it long past reason. because the alternative is admitting the foundation was rotten from the start. So she dug in deeper. Oh, don't you start too, Daniel. Somebody in this family has to be honest for once. That child is not yours. You took on Claire's daughter, fine, that was your choice. But don't ask the rest of us to rewrite the whole family bloodline because you've got a soft heart. Her voice was climbing now. Your real children, Noah and Ava, they're Bennetts. They'll inherit this house someday, this land, what's left of it. I will not watch you hand it over to a stranger's kid playing dress-up at my table. The word stranger hit Dan like an open-handed slap. Renee, sensing her mother needed backup, finally found her voice too. Mom's right, Danny. Blood is blood. You can't just decide. I did decide, Dan said. Still quiet. But the temperature in that room had flipped. Vivian was flushed and rising. Dan had gone cold, just like me, the two of us standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Lily, radiating the kind of calm that scares people worse than any amount of yelling. Walter finally looked up from the tablecloth, his old face gone gray. He already sensed what was coming because he'd seen the same envelopes I had, month after month, and he knew a long overdue reckoning was about to land at his own wife's table with the roast still steaming. I felt Lily's hand fist into the back of my dress. I felt the envelope waiting in my bag. And I decided it was time to stop letting them argue about whether my daughter was real, and start showing everyone in that room exactly who had been carrying this family the whole time. Here's a hard truth about keeping the peace for 3 straight years. You end up teaching everyone around you that the peace comes free. It never does. Somebody is always quietly paying for it, in cash, in silence, and a little kid learning to stand a little closer to the exit. If you've ever been the one silently footing the bill so everyone else could pretend the family was fine, comment I paid for it too below and keep watching. Total is about to come due. I looked down at Lily, her green dress, her wet eyes, that stubborn little jaw the county court had made official 6 weeks earlier, whether Vivian liked it or not. Then I looked up at Dan, and he gave me the smallest nod, because after 3 years of marriage he knew what my face looked like right before the books got opened in front of everybody. I reached into my bag. The whole room watched my hand the way you watch a magician mid-trick, not sure what was coming but sure something was. I pulled out the manila envelope first. No slamming it down, no speech. I just walked to the table, to the empty space where Lily's chair should have been sitting all along, and talked in the same even voice I use with clients who've made a mess of their books and need to hear the plain truth. Vivian, for 3 years I've sat at your table and listened to you decide who counts in this family and who doesn't. I let it go because Daniel asked me to, and because I believed you'd come around, and because keeping the peace is just what I do. I set the envelope flat on the cloth. I'm done keeping it. Blood doesn't make a family, Vivian. Showing up does. Let me show you who's actually been showing up. I slid the first paper out and laid it face up on the table, turned so she could read it, the county seal catching the light. The whole table leaned in. Renee craned her neck. Walter reached for his reading glasses. And Vivian, who just told a room full of witnesses my daughter was a stranger playing dress-up, looked down at the legal paper and the judge's signature and slowly began to understand what she was reading. That's a court order, I said. 6 weeks ago, in front of a judge, Daniel legally adopted Lily. It's finalized. Her legal name is Lily Bennett. I let that sit a beat, let the raised seal do its work. By law, she is his daughter, not his stepdaughter. His daughter, full stop. Same as Noah, same as Ava, which makes her your granddaughter, Vivian, and his legal heir equally with the same claim to this house and this land you were just promising the other two. Vivian's hand shot out and gripped the edge of the table. You can't just. We already did, I said. A judge signed it. There's nothing left to argue and no one left to argue it with, because Lily's biological father gave up all his rights years ago, and Daniel stood up in that courtroom on purpose and took them on. That's what showing up looks like once you finally put it on paper. I watched the color drain out of her face. She'd spent this whole night, this whole 3 years really standing on one single word, blood. And here was the actual law, telling her that word had just been rewritten right underneath her feet without her ever noticing. The little girl she'd just pushed toward the porch now held more legal standing in that house than the 2 grandchildren she'd spent years grooming as her allies. Noah, reading over Walter's shoulder, broke into an enormous grin. "So Lily's really our sister now? Like for real?" "She was always your sister," Dan said. "Now the law just agrees with the rest of us." Ava reached across the table and grabbed Lily's hand. And Lily, who hadn't said a single word since the doorway, looked down at the paper with her new name printed on it, then back up at me, and something in her small, careful face finally uncreased. But I wasn't finished yet. Vivian had called my daughter a stranger and a freeloader in the very same breath. And there was a second paper still sitting in my bag. This one had nothing to do with Lily at all. This one was entirely about Vivian. "That," I said, "is only the first piece of paper." I pulled out the folder and laid it beside the decree, flipped open to the summary page, categories down the left margin, a running total across the bottom in my own handwriting. "You said this table is for blood," I said. "Let's talk about who's actually been keeping the blood fed." I touched the first line. Walter's heart medication. Every month for 3 years, about $500 a month, because that's what the co-pays run, and his pension doesn't come close. I moved my finger down. The roof, the winter it caved in, $6,000, paid off in installments so it wouldn't scare anybody. Groceries, the weeks the medication ate the food budget. The water heater. Property taxes twice. I turned the page so she could see the final number, underlined twice the way I underline every figure that matters. Just under $38,000, Vivian. Over 3 years. Not $1 of it came from Daniel's paycheck. I let that number sit in the air. It came from me. From the bookkeeper. From the stranger's kid's mother. I've been paying to keep this house warm the whole time you've been deciding my daughter doesn't belong in it. The silence in that room had weight now. Renee's mouth had fallen open. And Walter, gray-faced, finally looked at his wife and said the thing he should have said years earlier. "Vivian. It's all true." He'd known, of course. He'd watched his own prescriptions get filled and his own roof get fixed by money his wife refused to see. He'd said nothing because saying it meant facing what it meant. Now he finally said it, too late to be brave but just in time to be honest. Vivian stared at the total, then at her husband, then at the daughter she'd just called a stranger, whose mother had apparently been carrying their household for 3 years without a word. And the foundation she'd built her whole identity on cracked clean down the middle in front of everyone. Vivian did the only thing left to a person whose argument has just publicly collapsed. She got loud. She snatched the napkin off her lap and threw it on the table, her voice cracking into something raw I'd never once heard from her in 3 years of cold composure. "How dare you? Bringing money into MY home on my son's birthday. This is exactly what you people think buys your way into being family. You think a checkbook makes that child blood?" She was on her feet, palms flat on the tablecloth, flushed red to her hairline. Renee reached for her arm, and Vivian shook her off without looking. "Get that paper off my table. This is my house. This is my family, and I will decide who sits at this table." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part one want you to hear because it's the only part of this whole story that ever actually wins. The louder she got, the quieter I got, until the gap between us became the whole story. "I'm not raising my voice, Vivian," I said. "I don't need to. The numbers already did that for me." I rested my hand on the folder. "And I didn't bring money into this. You did, the day you decided some children eat at the table and some eat by the door. I just wrote down what it cost." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There's a specific kind of silence that lands on a person who spent her whole life controlling a room, the moment she finally loses it in front of everyone she's controlled. Walter looked at his wife like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Noah had his arm around Lily. Ava was crying quietly into her napkin. And Dan, who'd stood beside me the whole time without a word, finally stepped forward and set Lily's drawing down on the table between the decree and the ledger, smoothing it flat. If you're still watching, this is where it all comes together. Give this video a thumbs up if you can already feel what's coming, and don't leave because Dan's next few sentences are the whole reason I named this channel Silent Revenge. Dan put his finger on the drawing, right on the word daddy in Lily's wobbly first-grade letters. He looked at his mother, then his father, and spoke in the low, even voice he'd apparently handed down to his own daughter without either of them realizing it. "You pushed my daughter out the door," he said. He let that sit. My daughter. I stood in a courtroom 6 weeks ago and swore to be her father for the rest of my life. And tonight, at my own birthday dinner in your house, you put your hands on her and shoved her toward the cold like she was nothing. His jaw tightened, then went still. So here's what happens now. We walk out that door together, all 5 of us, the whole family in this drawing. And the checks stop tonight. Every dollar that's kept this house warm for 3 years came from the woman you just humiliated, and the little girl you just called a stranger. If Lily isn't family mom, then neither is her mother's money. You don't get to have it both ways. Vivian went white, genuinely white, the color of a woman watching solid ground disappear from under her. Walter made a small, broken sound and pressed his hand over his eyes. Renee sat down heavily, watching an inheritance she'd spent months quietly policing suddenly reveal itself as a house her brother's wife had been secretly keeping afloat. Vivian reached one hand out toward Dan, toward the only son who'd protected her from consequences her entire life. For the first time ever, he didn't take it. "Happy birthday to me," he said, almost gently. "I'm spending it with my actual family." He picked up the drawing and the decree, pressed the folder back into my hands, then lifted Lily into his arms. His parents sat in the wreckage of their own dinner, pale and silent, the roast cooling between them, those 7 carefully counted place settings finally looking like exactly what they'd been the whole time. We didn't storm out. Storming out is for people who haven't already won. We just gathered our things the way you leave any dinner, only quieter, the whole room watching. Dan carried Lily on his hip, her face tucked into his neck. I slid the folder and the envelope back into my bag, fact beside fact, where they'd always belonged. Then Noah did the thing I'll remember longest. He stood up from the table he'd been told his whole life was rightfully his, looked his grandmother in the eye and said, "She's our sister. If Lily can't sit here, I don't want either." He walked over and took Lily's free hand. Ava followed right behind him without a word, the way she follows him everywhere. And just like that, the 2 real grandchildren voted with their feet, and Vivian's entire bloodline chose the stranger's kid. We walked out the front door together, all 5 of us, the same door Vivian had tried to push Lily through less than an hour earlier. Only this time we walked out on our own feet, the cold porch air sharp after the heat of that dining room. Behind us, nobody said a word. Renee didn't follow. Walter half rose again and sat back down, his final small failure of a very long night. Vivian stood alone at the head of her perfect table, her perfect china, her 7 carefully counted place settings, watching the family she'd spent 3 years sorting into real and not real walk out her door together as one unsorted whole. Lily, halfway to the car, lifted her head off her father's shoulder and looked back once at the house. Not sad. Just done, the same way I get done. And I knew all over again whose daughter she really was. In the car, halfway home down that dark county road, Lily finally spoke up from the back seat. "Did I do something wrong?" Dan answered before I could, eyes steady on the road, voice rough. "No, baby. You did everything right just by being you." She fell asleep before we hit the highway, the way exhausted kids do after holding themselves together far longer than any 8-year-old should have to. The automatic payments stopped that week. I closed every recurring transfer I'd quietly set up 3 years earlier, and the invisible money that had kept Pinehaven warm and lit went quiet for good. I want to be clear, I'm not a cruel person. Walter's heart is still genuinely bad, and I refuse to punish an old man's arteries for his wife's pride. So I set up something new, a direct payment straight to the pharmacy covering only his essential medication. Nothing that passes through Vivian's hands, and nothing that funds her version of family ever again. Comes with one written condition because I write everything down. The day Vivian is genuinely willing to call Lily her granddaughter and mean it, that's the day we talk about the rest. Until then, the door stays open, but only from our side. Walter called once, alone, and apologized in the cracked voice of a man who knows sorry is only a down payment on a debt he'll probably never fully repay. Vivian hasn't called. Renee hasn't either. The hallway in Pinehaven still displays its little gallery of grandchildren, and Lily's photo will never hang there. That's their loss to live with now, not my daughter's. Our refrigerator on Larkspur Lane is still covered edge to edge with her drawings. Last week she added a new one, taped right over the handle, 5 figures holding hands standing in front of a blue house labeled the same way she always labels them, Mommy, Daddy, Me, Noah, Ava. She started signing her full name at the bottom now, too. Lily Bennett. Blood decides who you're related to. Showing up decides who your family actually is. And these days I keep very good records of exactly who shows up, and who doesn't. If someone in your life keeps score of who's real family and who isn't, share this video with them or with whoever in your life has been quietly footing the bill for people who never even said thank you. Before you go, 3 quick things. First, drop a comment with the words "who shows up" if this hit close to home tonight. Tell me about the one person in your family who's been quietly keeping everything running while nobody bothered to notice. Second, tell me what city you're watching this from and what time it is right there for you. I read every single one, and I love seeing exactly where this story landed tonight. Third, if you like this video, tap that like button and hit subscribe with notifications on because Silent Revenge posts a brand new story just like this one every single week. We don't yell on this channel. We don't slam doors. We just keep the books and we let the truth do the rest. See you in the next one. Silent Revenge.